Wait. Joining us for the OLDC virtual recruiting and interviewing program. Super excited to see all of you here tonight, and we're going to be recording today. So Sabrina will take away your videos, and you can opt to, include them if you'd like. But we want to make sure that that no one's being recorded if they're not comfortable with that. This program will be uploaded to our OLDC webpage to be shared with other students and recent grads who might benefit from the program. Today, we are really excited to have three panelists joining us. The first is Delanté Spencer, and he is Delanté Spencer Thomas, I apologize. And he's the director of JD Advantage Advising and Outreach at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. We have Alex Schoultheis, who is the manager of legal talent at Thompson Hine, and Valissa Howard, who is the first assistant deputy inspector general, chief of staff, and chief diversity officer at the Cuyahoga County Agency of Inspector General. And they are going to give us a presentation and do a dialogue about the best ways to search for jobs and what the state of recruiting is in our current climate and interviewing in a virtual space. Thanks to all of you.
All right, thanks, Nirvana. So super excited to be here. Let's see, make sure all right, cool. I think, so my role this evening, I'll kind of interject and give some thoughts and advice as it relates to the law school perspective on things. But I'm super excited to have this conversation with Alex and Valissa as experts in their field as it relates to recruiting and interviewing, specifically for diverse students. And so just to get right into things. So the first question that I'll ask is, centered around recruitment. And so, I think we've already gone away from, or we're already pretty engulfed when it comes to virtual recruiting. But in terms of, things that are happening with the pandemic right now, if we can start with you, Alex, in terms of,
Sure.
What should students expect in virtual recruitment, and how's that going to look in the foreseeable future as it relates to OCI or other types of ways?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of virtual recruitment, it's here to stay until it's not. We as a firm are kind of projecting that virtual recruitment is going to be our MO at least through the middle of next year, just because we'd rather plan for virtual recruitment a little longer and overestimate than under. If I was a law student right now, what are some of the changes? Well, first and foremost, you're not going to be able to get that handshake, that greeting, that face-to-face that you get with a person-to-person interview. That said, though, there's not a tremendous amount of change. What's really interesting on the firm side of things is the feedback I get, especially the first 2 to 3 months that we started doing this and kind of getting partner buy-in on the virtual process, was everyone saying, wow, not much has really changed. Other than being able to meet them person to person and kind of judging their body language as a whole, the content and the interview itself is still largely the same. The one thing I will say is, whether it's WebEx, Zoom, BlueJeans, there's a variety of different platforms. To the extent you can kind of familiarize yourself a little bit with each of them, that would be ideal, just so you know what you're kind of working with. But in terms of the virtual interviewing, as it relates from the firm side, jumping into it, there hasn't been too much change than vis-a-vis an in-person interview. You still want to arrive early to your WebEx interview. You still want to send your follow-up thank you note. You still want to have a couple questions, squared away, so that way when you have your chance to ask, you can ask it. And then just kind of plan for the unexpected. There may be audio issues that happen and pop up. Have a backup plan. Have that person's phone number just in case, because you still want your interview to kind of go forward.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And so Valissa, specifically wanted to ask you, so a lot of times recruitment not only happens the formal way, right? So through OCI or through, some other formal process. A lot of times it happens through those networking events and through just meeting people, right? How should students navigate, being in the recruitment process or being, how can they get recruited outside of that formal process when everything is virtual?
So one thing that I would suggest is it's something that I've been doing is, there are a lot of virtual conferences and virtual things like this that pop up, and because everyone is working from home or doing school from home, you maybe have more time to attend those sorts of things. So I would say, and most of them are free or low cost because they're virtual. Go to those things um, and meet people that way. I know it seems odd, but you can still meet people virtually at a Zoom event. That's why there's a chat function, right? And then also, many of the things that I've spoken at, I always put my email address in the chat and say, contact me. Please talk, if you have a question, if you're looking for information about government compliance work, ethics work, please contact me. Very rarely do I get students who take me up on it. And I'm not kidding. I really do want you to contact me. And the other piece is when people say that, find them on LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn. Don't send them a blind, connect, but write them a message. Hey, I really enjoyed your presentation during the XYZ conference. You said, connect with you. I'd like to. I have questions about XYZ. I just did that last week with a student who said, I'm interested in regulatory work. And so there are still ways to connect. You just have to be a little more expansive and think broader than how we usually used to do it, right? With a card, with a business card, and then the follow up. So as Alex said, it's really the same, but it's different. It's really follow up. It's really taking people up on their offer. And it's really going to events, though they are virtual, but going and finding people to connect with.
Yeah, one piece that Lisa mentioned that I'd like to echo is is using the chat feature, right, and reaching out to those who are in the same events as you, and it might feel weird at first, but don't hesitate to do it, right, because essentially it's the same as what would happen if you're standing around that high top table at some networking event and saying, hey, here's my card, or hey, can I have your card, or sparking some of that individualized conversation, even amongst a larger group conversation. So definitely take advantage of that. And as Valissa mentioned, follow up, use LinkedIn, email, if you remember where the person works, right, go to their firm website or organization website to see if you can find their contact information that way, if they haven't left their contact information for you. But that follow up is really, really, really important to make sure that people remember you. And because that's the key to it, right? Making sure that people actually remember who you are, and that may be a little bit more difficult to do, when you don't have that one-on-one or that in-person connection, but it absolutely can still be done. And people were or have been recruited virtually long before this current time, right? So as Alex mentioned, this isn't anything new. And so I want to go a little bit deeper into the interview aspect. Alex, what do you say students should do in terms of preparing for an interview? Like what information do you expect students to know beforehand?
Yeah, it's really kind of doing your homework. So it's no different from law school. Know your audience. When we schedule an interview, we send you a list of the individuals you're going to be meeting with. Pull their bios. If you're meeting somebody that's litigation versus more transactional, maybe have a couple questions prepared for each of those individuals so you can ask to their specific practices. If you are interviewing somebody that went to your law school, that's a warm connection that you can kind of lead with. Knowing your audience and being prepared about the firm that you're interviewing with. I mean, you may have 4 different interviews in a span of weeks. Jot down a couple bullet points that are memorable about each of those firms and weave that into your interview at some point. That's kind of number one. And number two, I would say, is one of the things that we do at Thompson Hine, we kind of focus on behavior interviewing. Prepare to kind of tell a little bit of a story of you or your brand. I know it sounds a little cliche, but humans are naturally attracted to stories and individuals and backgrounds, and everyone has a different background, and we're really interested in learning that. And you have to think that, I mean, on the employer side, I mean, we may have, for callbacks, for example, 12, 15 interviews for one position scheduled in a week. What are you going to do, bring to that interview that's going to make you stand out? So that way, when I see that name, I say, oh yeah, that was, the person who told me about X, Y, and Z. I mean, the more that you can kind of share your authentic self and your story, the more you'll be memorable in our partners and in our recruiting process. I mean, those are just a couple of the things that I'd say when getting ready for a virtual any interview, but especially a virtual interview.
Valissa, anything to add?
Yes. So in my office, we always, and I just want to follow up on what Alex said. We always want to know, what do you know about our office? Because we're sort of a odd little niche, and we're the only agency of Inspector General within the entire state besides the state Inspector General. We always wonder, why do students or new attorneys, why do they want to work here? What do you know about us? And are we, somewhere you've really thought about working, or is it just somewhere you're checking off a box? So I really encourage you to research where you are interviewing and be able to articulate, what they do and why you want to work there. Do you have a true interest? Because we can spot that from a mile away and say, nope, not interested, because we're just a check box for them. I'd also say, in the virtual world, prepare your space. So just like in an in-person interview, when you show up, they're looking at, how are you dressed? Are you sloppy? Do you have spots on your shirt? Do you have on a shiny tie? They're looking at all those things. They will, unfortunately, be also looking at the space behind you. Is it cluttered? Do you have food? Do you have do you have stuff everywhere? So prepare your space. Prepare, really think about intentionally, where are you going to sit? What is your background going to look like? Who's going to be at home? If they're going to be at home, make them stay in their room, whatever it is. Really intentionally prepare for that interview in your space, because you're not going to their office. They are coming to your home or to, the library, if you get a private room in the library, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, we're going to dive, deeper into some of those details too in a little bit. So I'm glad you mentioned that. One thing that I'll add is, and specifically to what Alex and Valissa both mentioned, in terms of researching the organization, the firm, or wherever it is that you're interviewing. Here's a pro tip. Okay, pro tip. A lot of times organizations, especially if it's a corporation or a publicly traded company, but even some firms or other organizations, you'll see, you may find a document on their website that speaks to the annual performance or an annual report of that organization, firm, etc. Okay, look through that, because more times than not, it's going to identify some weaknesses of the organization, right? Things that we could have done better, or things that, right? And you can also look at those documents from year to year or from period to period and see, hey, wait a minute, this dropped off, or hey, this wasn't as good this time around, right? And then if you can then tie what you can bring to the table to better that experience, right? That's going to be an invaluable comment to add to the conversation, to be able to get that into your interview. Because not only can you say, hey, I'm great, but not only am I great, but I can also address your problem,
Yep.
right? And not necessarily saying, hey, you have all these problems, but, but I have something of value that can really enhance your team, enhance your organization, right? So it's more than just saying, hey, okay, hey, I know when this organization was founded, or hey, I know when this company, started and who the original partners were, who the original founders are, right? But dive a little bit deeper, right? When we say do research, find some of those details that's going to set you apart from other candidates who are absolutely not going to look at that type of information. So let me also ask, what are some common mistakes have you two seen in virtual interviewing? So Valissa, I know that you in your office have been doing virtual interviews and also in-person interviews, because I imagine some of the mistakes are probably the same, right? So same for you, Alex. But Valissa, if you want to speak to what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen, and how can students avoid them?
So I've seen these virtually and in person. And the first one is business on the top, night night on the bottom. Like you cannot. I know it feels like, but they can only see the top. Why do I have to wear pants? Because inevitably something is going to happen where you have to stand up or something, and you forget that you don't have pants on. Just wear the full outfit for an interview. Just put on a full suit, put on a dress, put whatever you're putting on, put the whole thing on, so that and that also helps you to get into character, so to speak. Like I'm doing an interview. I need to be. This is my next point. Informality is an issue. Sometimes people think I'm on video and they become very informal. No, it is a interview just like any other. You need to continue to be formal, even though you may be in your mom's basement, with only your pajama pants on. Put on a whole suit, be treated like a formal interview, and just be in character for the entire thing. I've seen this go left on camera, but also, as Delanté mentioned, in the office, I've had a student come in who, when he first got there, his tie was tied. I left him in a room. I come back, his tie is askew, and actually he's taking it off and putting it in his backpack. That was okay. Why did you? It was just bad. Come prepared. Your suit on, your tie tied. Do not take it off. Don't any of that stuff. The informality and and not being appropriately addressed can be an issue on camera and in person.
Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, so I've got this kind of branded as controlled interruptions versus uncontrolled interruptions. And so here's a couple that I've seen. One, just because you're in a virtual interview, you still need to silence your cell phone. If a cell phone goes off, don't answer the phone. One, but two, if the cell phone goes off, I mean, that's still a no-no. I mean, you could have prepared for that. You knew this interview was coming at a set time. Turn it off, mute it. You don't want that popping up in the interview. Our cell phones are always around us. That's one. Two, I mean, I'll say that make sure, test your connection or test your video. We had an interview once where the person, it was so dark, it was like we were interviewing them at midnight in their basement. And again, it just comes across as you're not prepared, you're not ready. When we book interviews, we actually send a WebEx PDF of here's how to test your connection. If you can do that, great. But if you can't test it, join 5-10 minutes early to make sure you get any of these issues ironed out before the actual interview starts at, say noon or whatever. Join 10 minutes early. Just make sure that the video works, and that you're prepared for a backup just in case you need to pivot to that if your interviewer is having some problems. Covered, being dressed prepared. You don't know if the house is going to catch on fire and you need to leave. Just be prepared there. I mean, but I will say, on the uncontrolled interruptions, I mean, we've been telling our partners and everyone, look, I mean, we know that a lot of folks are parents and have kids that are doing remote learning. People have dogs. You can't mute your dogs. My dog's going off downstairs right now, probably because of the mailman. Those things happen, and we know that those things happen. So again, it's the controlled interruptions, the things that you know that you can plan for, versus the uncontrolled ones, which are just going to happen, just because it's life, and interviewing at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can't stress enough how important it is to be as prepared as possible. And as Alex mentioned, there are absolutely going to be things outside of your control. And so, to the extent that you can be prepared, the better. One of the things that I find is, if you're anything like me, virtual meetings, you tend to feel like you have more time, to kind of get yourself together than not, right? As opposed to if I'm physically going into a job interview, I'm thinking about how long it's going to take me to get there. I'm thinking about, parking time and all those types of things, as opposed to, okay, I have a virtual meeting at 11 o'clock. That means long as I'm walking towards my computer at 10:58, I'm ready to go. And so those types of things you still want to prepare. And again, make sure you're early, make sure, all of those types of things. And, if you're interviewing at a place where, so for the most part, from an interviewer standpoint or an employer standpoint, we may have our system set up a little bit early for you to log in, or there might be a wait room or those types of things. And don't think that those things are not being monitored. Right. It's being monitored whether you log on at 11 a.m. on the dot versus 10:55 or, 10:53. We're employers are paying attention to those things, just like they're paying attention to when you signed in at the office or when you walk through the door. OK, so again, just because it's virtual doesn't mean, hey, long as I roll over at 10:58, and have my screen on at 11, we're good to go. So again, make sure that you're preparing. I'd imagine that's also, a common mistake. And also I think to that same point, and we'll speak to this in a little bit more in detail as well. But, thinking about your comfort level, because I think as Alex and Valissa mentioned, you're being interviewed at home. And so naturally, you are much more comfortable or much more relaxed in your home environment, right? And so you may be naturally or unconsciously a little bit more relaxed, right? A little bit more slouched, or those types of things. And so here's another pro tip, okay? If you're worried about posture or those types of things, sit on the edge of your seat. Okay, if you're sitting on the edge of your seat, it actually forces you to sit up a little bit straighter, right? Because when you're a little bit more relaxed or a little bit more crouched over, you actually tend to be less engaged. Okay, and not just physically less engaged, but mentally less engaged because you're more comfortable. Right. So you're not thinking about, okay, what's the next thing I want to say, or what do I want to add, or what do I don't want to input? You're thinking, okay, what you want to ask me? And so think about some of those things as well in terms of how you prepare. So let's talk a little bit more about impressions. So how can students make a good virtual impression? Alex, if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah, it's tough because we've spent our entire lives up until March of this year meeting people in person and kind of gathering those first impressions. And so you have to think, how can I bring the energy and make that great first impression, but virtually? One of the first ones I will always say, because it just lightens the mood, is always just smiling. I mean, the psychology behind smiling when you meet somebody, it just naturally kind of breaks that ice, as opposed to just like nervous or the body language that you can portray on the camera is so important. And so if you smile, and the other one I will say, and this I haven't had very many people do this, and I think we're getting there, is if I look here directly at the camera talking to you as opposed to here, again, you feel like you're more engaged. You feel like you're talking to somebody, person to person across the table, as opposed to, okay, let me see what the other person's doing. It takes some time. It's a skill, just like maintaining eye contact in an interview. When you've got those first 10, 15 seconds of just kind of setting the mood and the atmosphere and your interest, those are really big, and we see it in the feedback.
Valissa, anything to add? How can students make a good first impression?
I think that one that you said already is punctuality. So that means, not if the interview starts at 11, don't turn on your screen at 10:58.
Right.
You should be a little bit earlier, just to ensure that everything is working correctly and that you're prepared. And I would echo Alex about the eye contact piece, like looking at the camera versus looking over at the side at people's pictures. And one way that you can sort of practice this is everybody can get a basic Zoom account or WebEx account, and you can go in by yourself and you can record it. You can watch yourself. You can answer questions. You may want to try that. Just practice, um, you know, being more comfortable on camera, and talking to someone through a computer. You can do that. And also, I'm going to offer my services. I'm willing to do mock interviews via, video, practice with one other person. I think it's the same way that we practice in-person interviews, practice the online ones, because the better you get at it, the more you will be able to connect and you'll do well, and have a better experience. And so those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. So, so let's talk a little bit more about interview questions. And so my question here is, are there any standard interview questions that students should prepare for? And I imagine some of that may be some, obviously some of the same things that you would see in an in-person interview. So if you can speak a little bit about, what questions should people be prepared for?
Yeah. I'll jump in first here. So my big three, and this applies for any interview. Why Thompson Hine? Number one. Show me you did your homework. Question two, which really won't apply to law students, but why are you looking? Why are you looking now? I mean, again, you're in law school, you're trying to find a job. So that's number two. And then number three is, what are you passionate in? What are you interested in? What areas, or are you keeping your options completely open? Those big three come with every single interview, across the board. After that, I mean, you start getting into smaller things like, again, it doesn't really apply to law students, but the type of position they're looking for, their expertise. But in terms of standard questions, I mean, we do behavior-based questions here. So start thinking about, again, crafting that kind of story or brand of you. What is the authentic you story? Why you went to law school? When you're in law school, what subject has tripped you up? I mean, we're really interested in, you being not vulnerable, but at the same time, just sharing, look, we see everything on your resume. So when you come in, we don't want to hear a rehash of your resume because we see that on paper. We want the story kind of behind the paper. So to your question, I mean, I kind of rambled there, but I mean, those big three, the number one, why Thompson Hine or why firm, you need to have an answer that's crafted and that's specific to every firm that you talk to, or any employer you talk to.
I think those are, yeah, the main questions. And then we also do the open-ended tell us about yourself, and the answer to that question is not the same for everyone, but that will tell us a lot about you depending on what you decide to tell us. And then we do, not for law students, but for folks who are looking for full-time positions, we will do hypotheticals. And that tells us, what do you know about ethics? What do you know about compliance work? How would you handle an ethical situation, that sort of thing. And so be prepared for that. In some non-traditional spaces, they may ask you to, do a quick hypothetical. Actually, when I was a first year out of law school, my first job was for a law firm in San Diego. At the first interview, I was given like 30 minutes to write a memo. Like they gave me a fact pattern. It was the weirdest thing, but um, it happened, and I had to on the spot be like, "Yes, I can do it." And I sat at the name partner's desk and wrote this memo in 30 minutes. But you've got to be again prepared and ready to do whatever needs to be done, and not get flustered. Because I don't even remember what I wrote, and it probably wasn't good. But I think the fact that I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it. Let me get it done." They were impressed, and I got the job on the spot. So.
Nice. So Alex, you mentioned something. I think your third question specifically was about, perhaps identifying areas of interest or practice areas, et cetera. This is something that, I personally remember struggling with in law school, right? And it was I want to say, hey, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z practice group, but I don't want to talk myself out of a job if
Yeah.
you don't have a position in that practice group, right? So
Right.
how do I navigate, um, you know, how do students navigate making sure that they seem open-minded versus also going after what they want, right? Because I
Yeah.
don't want to say, hey, I'm interested in employment law. And you say, oh, well, we don't have a job for you. Sorry.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of the toughest ones when you're interviewing is, where do I come down? And what do I say? What I say is this, is that, look, I'm not looking when I interview somebody to find just for them to say, wow, I'm really interested in 40 Act investment law or ERISA litigation. But what we have is we know we have openings for either something in the transaction space or the litigation space. So I always like to say, think of it kind of like a tree trunk, and you've kind of got the practice of law, and then law firms are kind of like trees in that they splinter into thousands of different sub-practice areas. When you sit for your kind of second round or 2L interviews, get a feeling of, okay, am I more interested in litigation, which more often than not folks are just because that's what they're initially exposed to in law school, or am I big on transactions? Do I have an economics background, finance background, business kind of focus, and is that something I'm potentially interested in exploring? So transaction and litigation is as broad as specific as I would keep it. Employment law, labor and employment, heck, even just general business litigation, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into saying this is just what I want, because as an employer, we're doing needs assessments. I will share this right now. We're doing needs assessments on what we potentially need for the fall of 2022. We don't really know exactly what we need at that time, but we have an idea of just generally what practice areas like L&E or business litigation that will fall into litigation, and which ones like finance and corporate that'll fall in transactional. That's kind of as specific as I would get right now, because a lot of people don't know what that. You graduate law school, you don't really know what area you really want to practice in.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really helpful. So, so I guess where I want to go next is in talking about the different types of interviews, and I guess more specifically, interviewing with different persons from the organization, right? So sometimes you may have that first screening interview with HR. You may have the interview with with a partner or administrator in the organization, et cetera. If you both can kind of speak to how students should prepare for those different types of segments, right? So, or also I'll add in there panel interviews, right? So sometimes if you're interviewing with multiple people, and how students should prepare for those and whether they're the same or not. Valissa, if you want to jump in first.
Sure. In my experience, an initial interview with HR, which is sometimes a phone interview or that kind of thing, is like the weeding out process. It's the, do you have the skill set? Can you do the work? Tell me, specifics about what you've done in the past if you're a practicing attorney or that kind of thing. If you then get passed on to the next rung of the hiring attorney or the partner or whatever, then they're looking at and this could also be the panel. Do you fit, right? Do you fit in this workplace? Can we work with you? Do we like you as a person? That sort of thing. And so I would say that you prepare for those differently, right? The first weeding out, make sure that you have your resume in front of you. You're able to articulate all of the experiences and the skill sets that you have that would be helpful for that organization. The second one, you know, if you most places will give you the list of who you're interviewing with for a partner or a panel discussion. But if they don't offer it, ask for it, and do some research. Look them up on LinkedIn, Google them, see what you have in common. Try to figure out where you can have some commonalities to talk about. Did you go to the same law school? You know, did you both clerk for a federal judge? That sort of thing, and be able to make some connections. Be able to show them, yes, I do fit here. I would be a great person to work with. And I've done my homework, and I know, you know, what this organization is about, and I'm interested. I want to work here. And so those are the key things that I would say for those types of interviews.
Yeah, Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, Lisa kind of hit the nail on the head here. I mean, the HR is the vetting the resume. The interview with the hiring partner is the vetting of the person. Does this person fit culturally into ours? I would also say, I mean, kind of the HR side of things. You can use this as a little bit of an informational interview too, because like sometimes when you're applying to a posting, they keep these postings, and we do this intentionally, so vague that you're not entirely sure. You know, give me some details and ask that person that's kind of fielding that job description, who would I be working with on a daily basis? Because they can give you a heads up later on in the interview process. Okay, these are kind of the power players that I need to talk to, or these are kind of the gatekeepers in determining who makes that hire. So for the HR interview, yeah, make sure you have your resume because they're going to vet that. But then, to the extent you can, try and get as much information as you can about the position that you're working with. You know, if it's a summer program, is when it generally starts, that type of thing. So try and get as much information from that first one, and then on the second one, again, I mean, try and get as much information about the subgroup or the group that you'd be working with. It may be that specific partner that you're working with, and try and get a feel for them, because while you want a job, you also want a job at a place that you're going to enjoy. And if you're talking to somebody and you just get that vibe where you're not sure you're connecting with them, it's as much a decision that your decision as it is a firm decision in terms of employment.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, and actually a great segue into what I was going to mention. You know, which is, excuse me, you know, this is, as Alec mentioned, this is just as much an interview for you in terms of you interviewing the organization, as much as they're interviewing you, right? And so, and yes, there's this power struggle of like, okay, yeah, you want a job, but also you want it to be the right job, and you want it to be a right fit, and this is your career, right? And so, here's another pro tip, right? That may help with confidence, right? Is recognizing that if you've been called for an interview, more times than not, or more than likely, the organization has already identified that you have the skill set or that you have the credentials to be here, right? You already potentially have what it takes to be in the door, right? And so it's not quite the, you know, it's yours to lose situation just yet, but it's you know, one of the things that we at my when I've been involved in interviews before, one of the things that we used to tell our applicants, or maybe after we've already accepted them, is, you know, we just want to make sure you're not a crazy person, right? Like, you know, we believe that you can write. We believe you went through law school. You've handled X, Y, and Z. That's fine. But long as you're not going to be crazy, especially if you are going into a smaller office. Okay. If you're going to be working in a smaller office, the dynamic is so crucial to that, because you have an office of 10, even 15, or even 20 people, right? One person can mess that up, can completely destroy the whole dynamic, the whole atmosphere of the office. Right. And so those are the types of things that, that can a lot of times be important. Right. So, so for example, I remember, interviewing for jobs, and And having conversation about like, do you enjoy happy hour? Do you enjoy, what types of things do you do for fun? Right. And so making sure that you are, prepared for those types of personal questions as well. And again, you don't have to go in too deep, like, hey, I like to get wasted on Saturdays, right? Don't do that. But people want to feel like you're going to be somebody that they're comfortable with, that's going to fit in, that's going to help to enhance the culture. And so I'll also say that you want to make sure that that you have prepared questions as well to help you make that decision for yourself. Right. So not only to get to know the firm and the practice group or the organization and the type of work that you'll be doing, but who are the people that you're going to be working with, right? Who knows how long your career is going to be at that place. And so you want to make sure that you're asking questions that truly help you. So, and that's such an underrated area, I think, that I have seen with students is, students will come up with questions because they just feel like you're supposed to have questions. So I'm just going to make up some questions to ask. But use that. That's such a valuable tool to identify whether or not this is a good fit for you, right? So, for example, if I'm interviewing, with Alex or Valissa, and I'm, and maybe you might think to ask, okay, well, how did you get to the position where you are? And it's like, yeah, that may help you to get to know them a little bit more, but does that actually help you make a decision about working for this firm or for this organization? Asking. But personally, I'd love to ask about what's the environment like, right? What's the culture like? What are some of those things? Because for me personally, that's a huge determining factor on whether or not I want to work somewhere, right? Is what is it like? You may want to ask the interviewer, what do you like, or how do you like working here? Do you expect anybody to say, yeah, I don't like it, I hate it? Right. So those types of questions don't necessarily help you to decide, whether or not this is a good fit for you. Right. Think about some questions that truly help you to decide. Right. So, for example, I may ask a more tougher hitting question. Right. What are some of the challenges of working here? Right. Don't tell me about how great it is. Right. It's easy to love something in its light. Right. Show me the darkness. That's going to help me decide whether or not I want to be here or not. Right, because I don't want to be blindsided when when the ceiling goes off or when things hit the fan, and I'm like, whoa, didn't think this was going to be like this, right? So think about that and remember that this is your career, and so you want to make sure that you're taking control of that. So we kind of talked a little bit before about. We talked about questions specifically, but I guess now I want to go a little bit into the responses. And so if you can kind of just speak briefly to, what types of responses do you expect or are looking for from students? A lot of times I know one of the things that's in right now are behavioral types of questions, right? Where you give an example of this, an example of that. What types of responses are you looking for in interviews? Yeah, Alex, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're dealing with behavior-based interviews, I mean, look, I would say there's no wrong answer, but there's certainly wrong answers. Just because from what we've seen. What kind of our responses that we're looking for behavior-based interviews are that kind of tell a story of you and how you persevered either over an obstacle or a disagreement. I mean, we're not asking you to get super personal. That's not the objective, but we're looking to kind of hear the story of you. The behavior-based questions, the reason we kind of ask them is we're looking for somebody to kind of think on their feet. And these are things you can't really prepare for, but you can also just kind of think back on your own life experiences. So when I had an interview that was behavior-based, what I actually did is I wrote like 3 or 4 different work situations and thought, okay, these are the ones I'm going to kind of go to if they come up. I mean, I'm not looking when I sit down for a behavior-based interview for a specific answer to anything. I'm just looking for them. And the other thing that I'm looking for is if they don't know the question, or if you're genuinely confused about the question that I asked, I want a response asking for clarification, or to really to kind of get then rather than just shoot from the hip and wonder, was that a good answer or not? Because if you're wondering it, it probably wasn't. And when you want to try and really get, okay, what are you really trying to get me to tell you? You're better suited with that approach. I mean, just being your authentic self, being sincere in your interest, those are the things that I'm really looking for. I want somebody that I kind of know when they walk out the door, generally about that person. It's not that's not the answer that I know a lot of folks are looking for, but just being yourself and kind of telling the story of you is really what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Valissa, anything to add?
Alex said the bulk of it. I would say for our interviews with law students, because you'll be with us for such a short period of time, we are really looking for fit. We know that we'll be teaching you how to do things, and so it's not really about the skill set and that kind of thing. Although, you know, we would like to see, can you string sentences together? But it's more about fit. When you come into our office for the interview, are you being weird? Are you being strange? Is this someone we want to work with for 3 months, or are we going to be hiding in our offices from the law student? So come prepared to show your personality. Definitely show who you are, and see, just like Delanté said, do you fit with our office? And also we'll also do the same sort of do we fit together? Is this going to be a good relationship for the 3 or 4 months that you're there?
Yeah. One thing that I'll add on to that is, this is, another pro tip, right? As you're answering questions, especially some of those difficult questions where you kind of got to think on the spot, or if you have a behavioral question where you ask to talk about a time you had to overcome this, or you had to do X, Y, and Z, absolutely make sure that your response circles back to a positive about you. Right. And something that leaves the questioner or the employer or whomever asks you the question with, leave them with the idea or with the thought that that response made you that much more valuable to our organization or to our company, our firm, et cetera. Right. And so that's going to be really, really important. One of the things that I see all the time, and I do this when I do mock interviews, I've seen it in real interviews, is when you get asked about, what are your weaknesses, or, or something or something you had to overcome, or tell me a time that you struggled at something, or, those types of things. It's like, it's absolutely a trick question. It's like, it's a trick question, but it's not a trick question. So, and what I'll say by that is like, it's a trick question because I want to see how you can handle that, right? If you can think on your feet. But then also, I kind of really actually want to know what's your weakness if you feel like you have one. You know what I mean? And so if you you don't want to just say, you know what, not really a good writer. You don't want to, and then just leave it at that, right? And what I advise students all the time now is, I like to use if there's any weakness, I like to use it in the past tense, right? In terms of, hey, this is something that I struggled with in the past, and this is how I overcame it, and this is kind of how I operate right now, right? That's, you want to be thinking about those types of things, because if you leave that question with, yeah, I just, don't really handle this well, or I think I had a student tell me one time, I'm not really a self-starter. I kind of hesitate when before I start projects or those types of things. Right now, as the employer, I'm thinking, oh, so you're someone that I have to stay on top of, or I can't expect you to get right to work when I give you something, or I have to, expect you to, right, or you're going to be the one pulling all-nighters, not because we had something randomly come up today and it needs to be in tomorrow, but because you didn't start on time. And, I don't want to deal with that. That's too much of a risk for me. You know what I mean? And so again, that is a question, or those are questions where you need to ultimately highlight a positive about yourself, if that makes sense. And again, if you're a case student, Valissa's already offered. I know Akron, Cleveland Marshall, we all do mock interviews to help you work through some of those things. So think about that. So one of the last things that I wanted to touch on before I kind of open it up to any other questions is I want to go a little bit deeper into some of the technical things, right? In terms of background and et cetera. And Alex and Valissa have both kind of talked about this already. And so I wanted to just kind of give my own 2 cents on that as well. And that's specific to setting your scene, right? And so think about, what's in your background in terms of political messages, right? Thinking about, is it busy? Is it cluttered, right? I've been on these types of interviews or virtual interviews or just in meetings in general where, because I'm paying attention, I'm looking like, what's in your background? What you doing, right? Like even with this right now here today, I've been wanting to see what that sign is on Alex's wall and what is it. Right, I've been looking at it. I'm like, look ahead over a little bit.
It's one of
see what that says.
One of these inspirational things they put in the bedroom. I don't know. It's like one of those, love quote things. But yeah.
But yeah, so those, and it's not to say that you should just have a completely bare blank background, right? I mean, I think you can have something there. That's fine. So same thing. I'm looking at Valissa's curtains and I'm seeing what's on her shelf over there at the side, right? And I'm sure if somebody like me, I'm looking like, okay, what are these degrees in the background? What was this, right? And so just be conscious of what's there. Also, now this is kind of the PR in me, where I'm always thinking about graphics and lighting and those types of things. So boom, here's another pro tip. Make sure that, especially if you have good lighting where you are in terms of daytime, et cetera, if you can have your light, and I'm like looking because I'm like, I want to like show you, but like on screen, I don't want to just like move my laptop, but you want to face the light, right? You want the sun to be coming in at you, as opposed to your back to the sun. Okay, so if your back is to the sun, your lighting will be exponentially worse than what it would be if the light is facing you. Okay, so think about that as well. Think about some other things that help you to have confidence too, versus so for example, how high you have your screen, right? Like those types of things. In terms of trying to be eye level with the camera. Think about other things that might be on your screen that you want to make sure that are, make sure you aren't distracted by pop-ups, or make sure your screen is centered, because that's going to pay attention, because it's going to affect what it appears that you're looking at. You know what I mean? So for example, if your screen with everyone or who you're interviewing with is over off to the side, then you're looking off to the side the whole time, right? And that's going to be absolutely noticeable to who you're interviewing with. And so you want to think about that. Think about your camera angle, your outfits, those types of things. Are what I think Valissa hit it on the head in terms of being fully dressed, and I think it just goes with the confidence and feeling that, okay, I'm here for an interview. So those types of things. If you have, you can get those, you can get a ring light that are pretty inexpensive now. So that may also be really helpful, something that you might even be able to clip on to the top of your laptop. Again, it helps with the lighting, because, listen, we all have Instagram, right? Think about that, or think about where else you might post pictures. The pictures that get you the most likes are the pictures that are well illuminated, that have clear backgrounds, right? That aren't cluttered, that are visually pleasing. Okay, so that is no difference here when you're talking to someone, especially in this type of setting, those things absolutely still matter. So anyway, so I wanted to make sure I jumped in on that. Also, again, in terms of angle of your camera, you can also, stack books underneath your laptop if you feel like you need it to be a little bit higher. So think about those types of things. So we have about 6 minutes left. So I want to make sure that if there are any questions from those attending, please feel free to ask. Anything? Okay, we'll keep the show rolling. So Alex, best practices, takeaways from today's conversation.
Yeah.
What is your expert advice?
So let me see if I can share my screen here. Go. See, this is becoming an expert and knowing your device. There we go. Content. One. All right. So here are my kind of key takeaways. Remember to do your homework on the firm, wherever you're interviewing. Know that when you come in, that you can convey to the firm that, or wherever you're interviewing, that you know who they are, and that you're interested. Test your connection in advance if it's possible. If not, join early. Make sure that your connection's set and ready to go. Kind of targeting back to a little earlier, the controlled interruptions versus the uncontrolled interruptions. So turning off your cell phone, making sure your background is kind of clutter-free, the lighting. These are all things that you can control versus those uncontrolled interruptions that just kind of come with interviewing from home. Dressing for the job you want, making sure that you're fully dressed, prepared for an interview, just like you'd be sitting in that firm conference room. Questions. Have at least 3 to 5 questions ready to go with every interviewer, even if you don't have time to get to them. There are some interviewers who will go for 10 minutes and then turn it over to you. There are others that will talk your head off. You want to be prepared either way. And then when possible, and we didn't get to this one, but we do it as a firm, see if you can get a backup option to your video conference. If it's the phone number of the person interviewing, I mean, if you're 5-10 minutes into your interview and that person's having technical issues on their end, offer to give them a call. Say, hey, I can give you a call. Is this easier? And have the interview that way. Always have a backup, just because you don't know when your internet company wants to drop out. I mean, we've all had it happen. And having it happen in the middle of the interview is the worst time, but you still want to be able to have that interview. This is your time to interview with that firm. So those are kind of my key takeaways. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Okay. Valissa, takeaways.
Okay, there we go. Couldn't unmute my mic. Okay, so my takeaways are very similar to, very similar to Alex's. Be prepared, think ahead, right? That's what Alex said, do your homework. Prepare for online interviews the same way you would an in-person interview. So that means be fully dressed, be formal, have questions prepared, prepare the same way. It's just that it's on screen. Ensure your internet connection is strong. That's similar to what Alex just said, right? Research the employer before your interview and be prepared to share why you want to work there. Take time to anticipate the types of questions likely to be asked in your interviews and prepare responses. So that's really very similar to what Alex was saying. And as you can see, 3-year-olds also you can't prepare for their interruptions either.
No, that's good. That's good. No, I appreciate that. We do see one question in the chat. Sarah asks, do you have any suggestions for places folks can go if they simply do not have a professional space available to them in their home or apartment? And she also adds that, there's the law library. There's other places in your schools, et cetera, that you want to think about. But any other ideas, Alex or Valissa, as to where students can go to interview?
Yeah, I would say if you have a friend who is working, they're not using their apartment, go there. Same with family members, that type of thing. But if you get a private room at a library, not even if it's not the law library, a public library, that would also do just as well.
Yeah, I would say, stay away from, and with COVID, but like coffee shops and whatnot where the general public is available, and you don't know how reliable their internet connection is. I know at first it kind of sounds like a good idea, but this is an interview where you want that as much controlled environment as possible. So yeah, I would say a law library, or honestly, and this is something that we're going to offer as a firm. If the firm that you're interviewing at, has a spare room that you can come in and interview there, it's still it's virtual. I know it's a little weird in that you're in the office, but it gives you a chance to see it. And you're in your own enclosed office, and you have a reliable internet connection there. If that's available, but definitely look into it.
That's actually a really, really, really good point. And I think if you have any type of issues or any type of concerns, the earlier that you communicate those, the better. Not only is it going to help you, set yourself up for the interview, but it also sends a message to your prospective employer that, hey, you know what, you're someone who's going to ask questions or who's going to address concerns and give appropriate time to address those concerns, right? So we had an interview at 11 a.m. and you're saying at 10:45, hey, right, can we do something different? It's like, perhaps if you would have told me 2 days ago, we could have prepared for that, right? And I didn't think of that, but that's a really good suggestion in terms of maybe the firm or the organization has a space where you can go. And it reminds me of in court right now. So, if I know some courts, I know for sure the city of Cleveland are offering that, if defendants or plaintiffs don't have a space to be able to log into these virtual hearings, you can come down to the courthouse. It'll still be virtual. You'll still kind of be in a separate room, but they have space available for that. And so same for the firms or any other organization that you might be interviewing with. So something else to consider. Okay, well, we're about, let's see, 6:30 or 6:32 now. Thank you to Alex and Valissa. I don't see any other burning questions here. But we're happy to leave our contact information. I think Valissa's already left hers. We also, just FYI, the Ohio Legal Diversity Consortium will be hosting our mock interview program. So check out our website or our link, which is also in the chat that Nirvana posted. Alex just left his contact information, and I am typing mine as we speak. So feel free to reach out if you have follow-up questions. But thank you all for attending and joining us on our Monday, and hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Nirvana, I don't know if you have anything to add as we close, but this is great.
Nothing to add. Thank you so much, Alex, Delanté, and Valissa. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you got a lot out of it. It was a really wonderful program. As Delanté said, check back to the website. We'll have more programming throughout the rest of this year and early 2021. But the next big thing will be the mock interview program. And so make sure you sign up for mock interviews. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.